Welcome, welcome. Welcome. Come on into the Zendo. The water is fine. It's nice to see you all today on this lovely Sunday, at least here on the west coast of California. The sun's out, the fires have dampened down, and the sky is clear, and the weather has just been beautiful these last few days. So nice to have a chance to spend that time with you, and this time with you. Have with me Michael Wilding and Amaryllis Fletcher, and we are sitting in for John Tarrant and Allison Atwell and Tess Beasley, as you know, and they are finishing up today an open mind retreat in Bolinas, and that is a short retreat from Thursday night to I think Sunday about noon. And it's a wonderful opportunity to sit together, to share stories with each other, and go for long walks along the beach, along the cliffs of the Pacific. And so I highly recommend the open mind retreats if you get a chance to attend those. Today we're going to explore a little bit Basho, just a little bit, and then some other stories, the stories of traveling. And I don't know why, but this notion of traveling, of life as a journey, has really been important to me these last months. Perhaps because I don't know, my in-laws have not been well. I had a little skin cancer scare. News from neighbors and the like that they have had, difficult diagnoses, and so this notion of our life as travel, and it's not always difficult travel. It's often joyous travel, and we have a poet coming in tomorrow night on the Luminaries series. His name is Robert Hass, and he did a book on haiku, which we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow night. But there's just so much richness in Basho, for example, who was a great travel writer. Not only was he a poet, Matsuo Basho, maybe the most famous of all Japanese poets, but he was always also a travel essayist. And so we'll be sitting with Basho today, if that's okay with you. And it's the introduction to the most famous of his many books, which is called Oku no Hoso Michi. Oku means the interior, and interior is not just the interior of a continent or the interior of an island. Interior is our interior, is our heart and mind. And Hosomichi means the narrow road. So the narrow road to our heart and mind. And for me, the great thing about this is that the road seems to start off narrowly, but as we practice, as we sit together like this with each other, as we support each other. And we go deeper and deeper and deeper into that interior heart. The path widens. You know, that's the beauty and the greatness of this journey that we take together. Is we start off in this narrow path, and it gets wider and wider and wider and more generous. And it's a lovely thing to share that together, because we can't awaken by ourselves. That's impossible. We can only awaken with all other beings. So we support those beings, and those beings support us. So let's do some of that supporting here in a second. And let me just read something from Basho. It's the first lines of the introduction of his collection of poems and essays called Oku no Osumichi, the narrow road to the interior. The months and days are like travelers of 100 generations. The passing years are also like travelers. For those who spend their lives on a boat drifting, or grow old leading a horse by the mouth, every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. Isn't that lovely? Every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. Let's just sit with that for a little while. The months and days are like travelers of 100 generations. The passing years are also like travelers. For those who spend their lives on a boat drifting along the shore, or grow old leading a horse by the mouth, every day is a journey, and the journey itself is home. So Basho died in the late 17th century, and is considered, as you know, probably the most famous and beloved poet in all of Japan, and really helped develop what's called haikai, or the haiku style of poetry, which was then picked up over the centuries by other great poets like Busan and Issa, who we'll probably talk about tomorrow night, but not today. It's funny because he's so famous that he's used in the curriculum, in the perhaps middle school and high school curriculum in Japan, teaching young kids poetry, and they have to read and memorize his poetry. And you probably know Mayumi Oda, but she was talking to John Tarrant one time, and she talked about how much she actually hated Basho because she had to translate so much of it and memorize so much of it in school. But Basho, who was born into a samurai family, had tremendous loss when he was young. He lost his parents. He was sent as an aide to a daimyo, or a lord's son, and he lost that friend when he was 22. And he started teaching poetry and started collecting students, but he decided to really simplify his life, and he shaved his head, and he put on the black robes of a Zen monk, and he actually studied Zen for a little while, but I think I think he didn't stick with it too long. Instead, he stuck with the walking. And when he was in his 30s, he began to develop sort of a native quality, a Japanese quality of haiku, and he moved away from the Chinese style, the very formalized structure, and sought the sense of spontaneity and freshness that we often work with, when we work with koans, this spontaneity, this freshness of life. Because that's what our internal journey is, right? Our internal journey is this journey, this day, right now, together. And what a blessing that is. And it's fresh and fresh and fresh, moment by moment. Never exhausts itself. And somehow when we realize that the path is, it's not narrow, it's not that hosomichi, it's not that narrow path to the interior. I don't know why, but somehow, as the path widens out, we feel more generous and more loving and more appreciative. And not just to others, not just to rocks and sticks and grizzly bears and babies and nieces and nephews and the like, but we feel more generous and loving to ourselves in a completely good and warm way. And that's what we call the opening of heart-mind. And ultimately, that's what awakening is opening this heart, opening this heart, opening this heart. Seeing the nature. Kensho means to see, the nature show. Kensho is seeing the nature and the light in all things. So Basho, his students built a little hut for him in Kyoto, and then he moved up to Tokyo. The first hut burned down. The second one, they built another one. And his students brought him a banana tree. And they planted the banana tree right next to the hut, this leaky hut he used to live in. And that's what Basho means in Japanese, banana tree. And each time his hut burned down or was destroyed or he moved out, they would dig up the banana tree and take it to the next hut. Which is a beautiful gift to their poem master, their poetry master, this banana tree, the banana tree. Let me read you a little more of Basho's poetry from his Narrow Road to the Interior. Sometimes it's translated Narrow Road to the Far North. And he departed on this trip with his friend and student and probably lover, Sora, a young boy, and is a 1,500-mile journey. And at the time, it was considered really dangerous in Japan to be traveling out in the far reaches where there were wolves still, and there were bears, and there were brigands, like Kurosawa's movies, Seven Samurai, running around. And he found it was a dangerous trip, he thought. But he found once he got out there that he got tremendous unbidden support, unexpected support from the world, from the way, from the Tao. And when we take risk and we put ourselves out there and we go to where we know not, we go into actually not knowing, not needing to know. It seems scary, it seems dangerous, but actually sometimes that scariest, most apparently dangerous choice is the safest choice. The choice where we can find ourselves again and again and again. And that's what koan work is. It's just an invitation. It's just an invitation to the universe. It's just saying, let's play, let's play. And sometimes the play looks like tears streaming down our cheeks. Sometimes it's laughter and joy. But it's the play of the universe. And we participate. And that's our great gift in life, is we have a chance to participate. And so we do. And we will. Meigetsuya Hoku Hiyori, the night of the full moon, the weather in the Northland. Nomi shirami uma no shito sura makura moto. Fleas and lice, horse moving in the stall, right by my pillow. So he's sometimes sleeping in horse stalls, and he's walking 1,500 miles through very sparsely populated country. And so he sleeps where he can, in the horse stall or the fleas and the lice. And there's the horse shuffling his feet right next to his pillow. Natsu kusuya, tsuwamo no domo ga yume no ato. The summer grasses of brave soldiers after their dreams. And this refers to a battleground that he found himself sitting in and just weeping and sobbing for the lost lives. And it was a battle with a general named Yoshitsune. And if you're if you like Japanese theater, kabuki, there are a lot of Yoshitsune plays, and very sad story about a well-loved general who saved the country, and then his half-brother turned against him, Minamoto Yoritomo, and sent an army after him and captured him and made him commit suicide. And also his wife and child supposedly escaped, but probably found killed. He also quotes Dufu, the Chinese poet, famous lines: countries may fall, but their rivers and mountains remain. When spring comes to the ruined castle, the grass is green again. We had wildland fires come over, which I mentioned several times before, over our property in 2019. It was just devastation. I'll tell you, it was really disheartening to walk over that country after it had burned. The oak trees, the grapevines, the grass, the houses, most of the houses in the neighborhood burned. And yet, it's back. The green grass grew this spring after a couple of years of rain, and the oak trees have recovered. And the gray pines are still, they're dead and silent sentinels to the fire, the legacy of the fire. Don't forget, they say. I was thinking about journeys, and I was thinking about how I came to sort of this school of Zen. We never know the path by which we come. We can never know. Any of us, if you had been told the story of your life when you were 21 or 22, you wouldn't have believed it, right? So I had finished college up in Northern California, where I lived for a time in a spiritual commune, and I was the Zen guy. And we would sit zazen every morning. We'd hold actually sesshin in the Korean tradition up there. And I was the head of practice. I think I was done, I don't know, 20 or something. We didn't know anything. And that was a good thing. That was a good thing that we didn't know anything. And I always want to get back to that place where I didn't know anything. And so I just did it, There's a purity in it. There's a wonderful freshness in that. So at any rate, I went up to Alaska, where I had worked and lived for several summers, and worked as a fisherman and paid off my loans, and came down to Nevada City to work as a carpenter with my brother. And my plan was to save enough money over some months and go to Japan to study Japanese for a year, I thought. And so the second night I was there, we went to a bar, and my brother and my sister were taking yoga classes. And I remember the teacher's name, Arlene Cohen. And at the end of the class, they used to do some Zen meditation, some zazen. And so by chance, we met Arlene in a bar, in the local bar, and we chatted. And as it turned out, she used to live in Hawaii and sit with Robert Aitken, who was John Tarrant's teacher. And so we decided to get together on Saturday, and we would sit together. These are one of the out of the blue things. And she got a call on Thursday from Bob Aitken's people, and they were holding a sesshin at Gary Snyder's place, Kit Gadizzi, out on North San Juan Ridge, where you may know this South Fork of the River, and you get on the other side, and it's a ridge. You pass the Malakoff diggings and sort of out in the sagebrush and the pines and the oaks. It's really beautiful. But so Gary, who was close to Bob Aitken, was holding a sesshin there. And this is before, if you know, the Ring of Bone Zendo, which was a zendo built by Gary and Bob Aitken and Nelson Foster. Beautiful zendo. If you ever get a chance, contact them and go out there. But so Arlene said, I'm going out to listen to the Tay Show. And I said, well, we were going to get together anyway. I'll just go, and they can only kick me out. And so I went out, and I sat listening to Bob Aitken give his Tay Show. And afterward, he came up, and I guess my posture was good enough to tip him off. But he came up and he says, oh, it looks like you've been sitting Zen before. I said, yeah, I did. I have. And I wonder if I could finish the last 3 days of this session. So I did. I stayed for 3 days and got to know Aitken. And I didn't know where I was going to go in Japan at all. I just had this idea within a few months I would go to Japan. And Bob said, "Oh, I'll write a letter to Yamada and Yamada Roshi in Kamakura, and maybe you'll get a chance to go visit there." And so I went off to Japan, of course, leaving a month away from a trip. I fell in love, and there was all that. It was it was great, but I continued on to Japan, and so I remember getting off the airplane and on the bus going into Tokyo, and I was so enamored with things Japanese that I looked down, and there was a guardrail. The bus was caught in traffic. I was looking down on the bolt on the guardrail, and I thought, that bolt was made in Japan. I'm in Japan. And so I went to, in Tokyo, near where I eventually went to school to study Japanese. And that was the first night. I stayed in a youth hostel. The second night, I went down to Kamakura and contacted Paul Shepard, who was sort of an interface between the foreigners who were studying in Kamakura, who were many, and Yamada and the sort of the Zendo itself. And that was the second day I was in Japan, and I never left. I was with Yamada for 8 years. This is our life. We think it's predictable and it's narrow and we can figure it out, but we can't. And it's okay not to figure out. It's okay to let this path be wide, because when it's wide, it's generous and it's loving, not only to others, but to ourselves. Importantly, so importantly, so much more importantly in some ways, to ourselves. So I had written a letter when I was in Nevada City, and I had spent days writing this one letter to Yamada Roshi and rewrote it, and this is my introduction. Thank you for reading this letter and, considering me and this and that. So some months later, I got to Kamakura and was in the Zendo, and Yamada, often when there was a new person in the Zendo, it would invite everyone in for tea to sort of introduce the new person. And so we go in for tea, and we're sitting there, and I'm expecting him to know a little bit about me, to ask me some questions, and that sort of thing. And he opened the letter for the first time and began to read it. And it was great to be there. And he was so welcoming without being sticky, without projecting his needs on the situation, which is challenging for both a student and a teacher, to project our needs onto the situation. Yeah. And then I was in Tokyo when he passed away. I had moved away the weekend that he fell down a stairway, and he became incapacitated and pretty much paralyzed. They put him in bed, and he was in bed for a year. And then just by chance, I went to Tokyo for the first time a year later. And that Sunday, I went to Zazen Kai, the Zen meeting on Sunday, like this meeting in a way, except in person, at the Sanun Zendo, and Yamada's house was right next to that. And they led me into his bedroom, and he was just white and pale as a sheet. And it was clear that he was in his last days. So that was a Sunday, and then on a Wednesday, he passed away. And then on Friday, I got word that there would be a what's called a tsuya, which is a wake, where tsu means to pass and ya means night, so you pass the night sitting around, meditating, drinking sake, telling stories of the person who has passed away. And so I went down and I spent the night there in the zendo as if it were a session. We pulled out after drinking some sake and telling stories. And Yamada's casket was in the zendo, and it's not a large zendo. And we all pulled out our mats and slept in the zendo with his casket there with us. And I just had the most lovely, deepest sleep. And I was leaving that day for the US, and I got up and I rolled up my mats and put them in the closet and left. And I knew then that I did have karmic connection with Yamada. And yeah, it was wonderful. Amaryllis, do you have anything to say?
Well, my life really feels like a journey now, a very, very slow journey with a lot of burdens. But one thing that seems constant is the sounds around me here in Denver, a lot of which really rub me the wrong way and remind me just to be here. And last night, somewhere in the middle of the night, sirens were going crazy. I think maybe some people are freaking out because public school is back in session next week, and it's like the end of the summer, and finally it got cool, and people are getting a lot of energy back. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was again awakened by a couple of motorcycles drag racing down the one-way street that runs just a half block from me. And this is something that neighbors and law enforcement complain about constantly. But the noise was just amazingly loud as they accelerated. And I'm like, I sure hope nobody's trying to cross that road. And I didn't go back to sleep. I mean, it was so shockingly loud. So there's always accompaniment along the journey.
That's nice. Yeah, it's a great story that John has about a friend of his who's a record, a music producer. He's all about rock music and that sort of thing. And he was pretty well known in that business, I guess. And he built a zendo down where he lives, down at his house, and he invited John down to sit. Beautiful zendo, very quiet zendo, and so they're sitting there, and a garbage truck comes and is backing up to pick up his garbage and making just tons of racket. And the host gets kind of angry at the garbage truck, and he's going to run out there. He's going to tell the guy to get out of there and everything. And John says, wait a second, to this music producer. He says, Don't be so snobbish about sounds. And I know it's easy to say, hard to do, Amaryllis, but it's a great story. Thank you. Angela, from afar, how about yourself?
Well, hello. Sorry, I haven't got my video on. I'm in a room with not very good connection. Just really enjoying that image of the narrow road. There's a famous, in Australia, a writer called Richard Flanagan, who he's a Tasmanian, who wrote a novel called The Narrow Road to the Deep North about his father's experience as a Japanese prisoner of war, and something about that sense of how the constrictions of our lives, his father came to a deep appreciation of Basho's work as a prisoner, and just something about that sense of the circumstances of our lives, the narrowness itself can open out. So I guess that's what's been with me as I've been hearing you read, and also just really appreciating hearing the Japanese as you read it in what sounds like, from my position of total ignorance, so fluently. So, thanks.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, nice. Yeah, Bob Aiken was a prisoner of war from the second day of World War II in Kobe. And his roommate was R.H. Blythe. And that's how he got into haiku and Zen, through being a prisoner of war. The narrow road, we can't know the path by which we came to Sanshan, right? It's been 10 years since I came to Cold Mountain, and I've already forgotten the road by which I came. Doug Phillips, I see you're back. Welcome back. How are you?
John, good to see you. I was taken when you mentioned the Every Day is a Good Day koan, and I heard a story just the other day that the group around Aiken who would get together, they were teachers, and they would go over koans, and I guess there was a certain competitive air about that at times, and they were working on Every Day is a Good Day. And I may get this story not right, so don't quote me to John Tarrant. But apparently, someone asks, "So, what do you say to someone who's lost a loved one in a horrible way?" And the consensus seemed to be to say every day's a good day. And the person who told me the story said that was the last one of those that John Tarrant attended. And I think this can be a kind of fierce grace, that yes, every day is a good day, and how heartbreaking it can be as well. My oldest daughter and her family have all come down with COVID, and they've had a pretty rough ride of it. And I've been really worried about them and sad, and the gift, the grace, is how vulnerable and close I feel to them. You know, and my fear and my wishing I could do something and my helplessness. And it's a gift, but the grace can be fierce, I think. And what a challenge to hold that. And how lucky that, we don't have to hold these moments by ourselves. So that was what was coming up for me in listening to you and the folks.
Mm. A poem by Antonio Machado, Traveler, There Is No Path. Everything passes on and everything remains, but our lot is to pass on, to go on making paths across the sea. I never sought glory, nor to leave my song in the memory of man. I love those subtle worlds, weightless and graceful as bubbles of soap. I like to watch as they paint themselves in sunlight and scarlet, floating beneath the blue sky, trembling, suddenly then popping. I never sought glory. Traveler, your footprints are the path and nothing more. Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking. By walking, the path is made, and when you look back, you'll see a road, never to be trodden again. Traveler, there is no path, only trails across the sea. Some time passed in that place where today the forests are dressed in barbs. A poet was heard to cry, Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking. Soon before Basho died, he traveled to Kyoto and he took his young nephew, and his sibling had died, and the wife was left behind, and she passed away while he was traveling with the young nephew, and he wrote her a haiku, and in autumn night, don't think your life didn't matter. In autumn night, don't think your life didn't matter.